Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live stream on analog computing. I'm Heinbach, and it is good to have you back. And today I am joined by two fantastic guests, Professor Bernd Ulmann, who is one of the most knowledgeable persons talking about analog computing, and he's actually building them also with his Analog Paradigm company. And he's written the probably the definite book on that topic, analog and hybrid computer programming, which is out on De Gruyter. And it's a fantastic book and it's full of inspiration. Also joining me will be Hans Kulk from Willem Twee Studios. You might know him. He's already been on the channel for quite some time, for 2 times already. One video we talked about his fantastic studio at Willem Twee, the test equipment studio, and the second was on the ARP 2500, which just came out 2 weeks ago and is about the ARP 2500 in Studio 2. And he's been into making music with analog computers for a long time. And as it turns out, the two know each other from way back because this is a rather small community. So I'm just going to look at the chat to see if the audio and everything is fine. You just let me know if all sounds good on your end. Hello, camera one. Yes, I think you can hear me. Perfect. Good. Good. Chat seems to update. Fine. So, for me, the interest in analog computing stems from what I call my interest in the roots of everything electronic music. I started out with a digital synthesizer, a Jupiter 8000, I think, or GP 8000 from Roland. And then I went to analog synthesizers of the 1970s, also Roland. Then I got into modular because I got tired of playing synthesizers that have already a fixed structure. And then I discovered test equipment, and which are the granddaddies of the synthesizers, the modular synthesizers that we play today. And from there on, it was just a little small step to analog computing. And I found an article on Atelier Telsonic, and that talked about how test equipment was used in analog computing simulations, and that you could use a filter, for example, a multiband filter to do simulations, and that fascinated me. And it turns out that article was written by Hans already. So that, without knowing, that was the first time I had contact. And that was the same time I discovered the company Analog Paradigm of Bernd Ulmann. And I was, oh, this exists? Someone is building these things? And he also has a museum of analog computers. And I said, I have to go there. And yeah, I would have loved to come already this year, but of course it's not so easy to travel right now. But yeah, I'm happy that we can all be here together. Now, there's one thing. Analog computers for music. That might not be the first thing that comes to mind when you think about analog computing. And I don't know if you've even thought about using analog computing for music at all. But there is a module called Maths. And that takes a lot of inspiration from analog computing. And in fact, when I was looking for patches to do on my little analog computer here, this is a Dornier 80, which is probably one of the smaller home computers for analog computing. I can hear it. So, yeah, better view. So I looked through Bernd's book and I discovered a bouncing ball patch. And I remembered, bouncing ball patch. I read that in the manual to Maths, and I never actually used that patch. I don't know if you're into Eurorack modules, but I basically use Math as like a Swiss Army knife to make snappy envelopes, and to shift stuff, to maybe create an ADSR, or to basically work with voltage. But I never got into the more complex programming. So I thought this is the perfect opportunity to take this patch, which is written in this book, and try it out on Maths. And luckily, to make it easier for me, it is described in the manual, both the new and the old one. And that sounds a little bit like this. Camera 2. And here you can see a little bouncing ball. A turn it up a little. So that's just a simulation of a ball that bounces, and it sounds rather natural. I couldn't get it to bounce only on the lower side. I didn't know how to work that, but I was happy that I at least got a round shape with a sine and a cosine around it. So that was my little win when programming here. But you can now change the gravity of this. So now we might be on Mars, maybe. If we make it quicker, yeah, the gravity becomes more, so it bounces less. And then, of course, it's fun to abuse these patches. Whee! So, but the interesting thing about this is, I found an old discussion on Muff Wiggler about the bouncing ball patch and that it wasn't musical. And I took it upon myself to put this into a musical piece because I think this is musical, to work with this, yeah, this physical, almost physical modeling-like simulation of a bouncing ball. So let me just show you what I did to that patch before I bring the guests in. So I'll bring in a second voice, which is modulated by the same CV. And now we'll send that CV also to a quantizer. And we have a little trill. And of course, now it would be nice to have some harmonic background. So I'll bring in the Syntrax, the synthesizer down here. And maybe we need some bass. That could be good. So let's use the no coast for that. And now let's bring in a response bass. This is from this Geranalog Generate 3 generator. Let's take down the trill again. And now let's bring in the Metasonics D100 because, yeah, who doesn't like a beat? And that is my little patch based on something that I think it was Telefunken did in the 1960s, but probably Bernd, you know better than me where exactly this patch originated from, because I actually found while researching, of course, it on his site, which is analogmuseum.com, if I'm correct. But one thing that I'll have to do And I'm not very good at that because usually when we stream, and when I stream, I do it with DivKit and Constantine, and they are like fiends in checking all your questions. I'm going to try to collect all your questions from now on. And then we will be, if they fit right in at the moment, I will pull them in directly. If not, I will be collecting them, and then we'll do a Q&A in the end. But now let's bring in my guests. First, we have Bernd, and then we have Hans. No, we are bringing both of them together because I can't solo everyone. So, hello.
Hi. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, you're welcome. How are you all doing?
Fine, thanks. Hans,
So,
you seem to be muted.
yeah, Hans, you're still on mute.
Yeah, so great. Yeah.
Hi.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you. I'm there. Yeah.
Hans, can you up your volume just a touch? Just a touch, maybe?
Let me do
On
it
the
like
mic?
this. Yeah, like this. Is
Yeah,
this
Mike,
better?
that's physical proximity beats gain.
Yeah. Okay. I'm here. Right.
Perfect. So, Bernd, let's jump right in. That patch that I was talking about, the bouncing ball patch, was it indeed from Telefunken?
The one I am originally referring to, yes, that was from a Telefunken application note from the early 1960s, but that was a pretty common patch that was used in all kinds of introductory lectures to analog computing. And I found numerous different implementations of the bouncing ball, in fact. Yes, but the one my program in the book is based on is originally from Telefunken.
Mm-hmm. But that's now already getting super nerdy, but I think it's called, they did bouncing ball in a box. And I couldn't get the box to work. And I also couldn't get, like, the one thing that I also couldn't get to work, it always goes back to the middle, and I couldn't have, like, a stable line to bounce it on to make it really in the visualization. But the one thing that struck me when I looked through your book was that you're very concerned also with the beauty of analog computers and how good they look. There's a very aesthetic sense when I read the book and how good it looks on a scope. I'm sorry that I only have a digital scope here.
Yeah, heresy, so to speak. But you are right. I really think an analog computer is, to quote someone from the 60s as well, a thing of beauty and a joy forever. There's nothing that invites so much for tinkering and playing with mathematical problems like an analog computer. Even if you don't know the exact behavior of some mathematical problem involving differential equations, you can get a feeling for the behavior of the system on an analog computer, something which a digital computer cannot give you in this way. You can just, like on a synthesizer, turn a potentiometer and immediately see the effect of this changed parameter to your solution. So it's a tinker toy for mathematicians, so to speak.
And I think in your book you have this, I should have like scanned this and put it on the second screen. And I think maybe I can show this. There are these old school explanations of the difference between a stored program digital computer. Let's see if I can show that on screen and if you guys can see it. Let me solo myself and maybe you can say a few words about that.
Yes, that is a topic that comes up every now and then. What the heck is the difference between a digital and an analog computer? And most people think that what makes an analog computer is the fact that the value representation is done by voltages or currents. This is most often the case, but that is not the fact that makes an analog computer an analog computer. An analog computer does not work by being programmed like you think of a program. So there is no algorithm. That is the main idea of an analog computer. No, do this, do that, and if the result is 0, jump to some other address in your memory. An analog computer does not even have any memory at all. An analog computer is programmed. You connect computing elements together to build an electronic model of the underlying mathematical problem. And this model building, from Greek analogon, that is what the name analog computer comes from. So an analog computer cannot be directly compared with a digital machine. So the typical question, is it Turing complete? Yes, on a very theoretical level, it is Turing complete. And there are even people who claim that an analog computer might be even more than just Turing complete.
Could you just tell for the audience who doesn't know what Turing complete means? Just give us.
Turing completeness is comes from the theory of computation and computationability and the deciding problem of deciding. And everything that can be solved by an algorithm can be done on a machine that is Turing complete. So if you have a computer, and all our common digital computers are typically Turing complete, so you can basically solve any problem that can be decided and solved with typical mathematical means on this machine. So in the digital realm, being Turing complete for a programming language or a computer is the main goal to reach. And all our modern programming languages are, of course, Turing complete, as are the underlying machines. An analog computer is sitting in a completely different corner. It has nothing to do with the traditional theory of computability and decidability. An analog computer really is a model, and it uses physical principles to build models of mathematical equations. So you solve your mathematical problem while measuring the behavior of an electronic circuit.
And I think, Bernd, Hans?
Yeah, it's understood more as a sort of an engineering tool.
Yes.
You know, like making a model and working on the parameters by turning switches, making other programs, and be on the fly engineering your system. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So an analog computer uses natural processes to simulate problems. A digital computer, sorry if I say this so bluntly, is inherently unnatural. Nothing in nature works by executing an algorithm. No animal, no brain, nothing really executes an algorithm. That is what makes algorithms so great. They are a genuinely new idea that came to the world with Babbage or even with Heron from Alexandria, but that's something that you do not find in nature. An analog computer makes use of things you find in nature. You charge a capacitor to compute a time integral, for example, or you add values by having two resistors and making use of Kirchhoff's laws. So an analog computer is much nearer to natural processes than a digital computer is.
And you can build analog computer not only from circuits, right? Analog computer.
You can use whatever underlying principle you like. There were hydraulic analog computers, for example, the Financephalograph or Muniac from Mr. Phillips, that really computed with filling water into bottles and weighing them for computing an integral. And that's precise. You can get 3 or 4 digits of precision by weighing water. Really impressive. And hydraulic computers, electronic analog computers, mechanical analog computers using gears and bezels and levers, whatever you want, you can basically use as the foundation for building an analog computer.
I remember I was at the Media Archaeological Fundus, and there the students built an analog computer for drink mixing. So it was really
great application.
Yeah. So, and you guys have been knowing each other for quite some time, right? Hans, where did your interest in analog computing come from?
Oh, well, I was really hard into analog modular synthesis for a while, and then there was no internet yet, and I got into a lot of books. And then I got this book, which is, I hope I can show it you.
Yeah, it's solo you.
Yeah, this book. It's a great book.
Oh, can you lift it up again? I was not quick enough on the solo.
Yeah, this is a great book by Appleton and Pereira. And there's a thing about voltage control synthesis, and then there's the Joel Chatterby telling me in the book that modular synthesis are conceptually akin, I think that's the best pronunciation, or akin, to analog computers. And then I thought, what an analog computer? So let me look. And then I found in the second-hand bookstore this manual, right?
Analoge Rechenmaschine.
Ja, analoog rechner, hè? Analoge rekenmachine. So it's from the Hitachi. So I thought, oh my God, that's interesting. And I became aware that it was a 10-volt analog computer. So I thought, yeah, you can do processes maybe and connect the voltages as control voltages for the analog modules. So I just went around going to people and eventually got a tip, a hint, that there was one in the basement of a technical high school in the north, up in the north in the Netherlands. So I just got there and they said, okay, take it away, please. So it was this desktop model of 100 kilos. So it was great, and therefore, I thought I think in 1988, I got this one. And short after, I visited all the technical high schools in the Netherlands and collected all the Hitachi 240s that were sitting in the basement.
Curious, how many Hitachis were there?
Well, I think about 12 or something. And,
Okay, and you collected all of them.
Yeah, and I just sorry, and
Very nice.
I distributed it to several other artists and synthesis guys, and also one to Bernd that had one now, and I also stripped some down for spare parts, so I do have a lot of modules in spare parts because I noticed it was a probably also I discovered from files that it was a one only for Holland at least a one only fabrication of these computers for the Dutch schools. So it was a government program to get to choose for the. They actually had to choose for Dornier or Hitachi, and they chose Hitachi. So, so that became the thing to, and it was so nice to explore that experiment. I can still, in my memory, smell I remember the smell of that first excitement of having such a machine and try things out without knowing anything. So it was exciting. And then, of course, I did a lot of research in the technical university high school libraries. And yeah, so I don't know anything about mathematics. I'm terrible in mathematics. I can't even count 1, 2, 3. Oh, it happened. Well, it happened. But then in the enormous amount of literature that is there, you have a lot of block diagrams, right? And if you understand the block diagrams, you can start doing the experiments. And that is, the block diagrams are a sort of universal language like in music notes are, and chords. So
let me just show for everybody a block diagram, right? Like this, you mean?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let me just solo
that.
that.
Yeah, you should solo that one.
Solo. So this is a block diagram.
Exactly.
So, and once you figure these out, you can build a lot of patches, and they're universal, applicable to analog computers around, around different formats, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a universal language, and that makes it really great. It should be noted that for modular synthesis, there's also that kind of universal language, which all people should yeah in a way learn, because then we can exchange patches through another without being instrument specific. You understand what I mean? Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah,
Because it's a universal language. You just have to know what module on your analog computer represents what input, right?
yeah. But
And
also
output.
on modular synthesis, on modular synthesize, you have the same idea of having different functions and combine them together and have some parameters like some knobs set to 50% or 70%, to have a certain function. So that's applicable in modular synthesis too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, same with the with the bouncing ball patch. You can
Yeah,
translate it from here uh,
absolutely.
to the Eurorack basically,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
fascinating. Yeah, that's
So, for instance, for the my teaching on analog synthesis and analog computer, I made a reader,
let me
and I made
solo.
this kind of this kind of block diagrams,
Mm-hmm.
which is a combination of analog computing and modular synthesis. So then you
Oh,
can have can make a program, and make a notation, and in that way memorize what you've done.
and
See?
is that reader available like for download, or do you plan on making it like a book?
Yeah, it's online somewhere. I will. I
Oh,
will.
yeah,
I yeah, it has been digitized, scanned. So I will send a link to you, so you can put it in the comments.
definitely for
Would be
everybody
great.
because I just read like that. Yeah, people would love a reading list to this,
Yeah.
and I'm definitely after this is over, I'll be putting out a reading list in the comments so you get all the recommended books, and I think that will be a nice thing. And
Well, at least if you look at the website of Bernd, it's an enormous amount of information on analog computing in all kinds of ways. So I would suggest people dive into that enormous library at the first. So
yeah,
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 Thank
that's
you very
also where I found the manual for my Donier and like even the service manual, all these things. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
mm,
Would you allow me a quick digression? Sorry, I just read in the comment section, someone commented on my remark that nothing in nature works algorithmically, and he commented that is not true for neural networks, for brains, so to speak. That is an interesting topic. A neural network is the archetypical analog computer. Since each single neuron
Exactly.
does not perform a program, the values are represented by a simple form of pulse code modulation. Stochastic computing makes use of this idea as well. But what makes your brain unique is the interconnection of your neurons, which is different from the interconnection of my neurons. And that is what makes an analog computer an analog computer. There's no program, there's only a structure. Sorry, just a remark to this
Yeah,
question mark in the comment section.
that's absolutely interesting because the one of our famous artists, David Tudor, that worked with John Cage, eventually got into designing a special integrated circuit for a neural network kind of thing, which is in fact an analog computer. Like the idea is a digital computer is a box of switches that switch each other, and an analog computer is a box of regulators that regulate each other, right? So in a continuous way. So David Tudor really did make amazing sounds with that development. Yeah.
Interesting.
I've got one comment that I found interesting because, where is it? Because that relates basically to also what you've been doing. They're actually building modern analog computers nowadays since they consume much less energy.
Absolutely.
And that was something that I read about, that I saw in one of your talks. There are a few talks by Bernd Ulmann that you can all watch on YouTube, and very interesting. So would you like to go a bit about your analog computer and the thoughts behind that?
Yeah, I would love to. Currently, my wife and I, we build analog computers, basically classical analog computers, but of course with modern components. But these are still programmed by a patch panel with all the patch cords which set up your program. The interesting thing in analog computing is that it is much more energy efficient than digital computing. One of the reasons is there is no memory, there's no step-by-step control, and the other reason is you have continuous voltages and continuous currents to represent values. So you don't have to switch rapidly between 0 and 1. The switching in digital computers, digital chips, is responsible for a lot of the energy consumption, since you have to charge and discharge millions and billions of parasitic capacitors within the chips. All the voltages in an analog computer solution are typically smooth. So you have no steps, no spikes, nothing which would require a capacitor to be charged or discharged in a very short amount of time. So typically an analog computer can be more energy efficient than a digital machine in the order of several decades. So a factor of 100 is not rare to be seen when you compare a digital solution with an analog solution when it comes to energy efficiency. One has to say that an analog computer is not a general purpose machine. From a theoretical point of view, it is a general purpose machine who could simulate gates in an analog way and build a digital computer from this, but that's not really practical. But an analog computer is a specialized machine. It's a machine basically for solving differential equations, systems of differential equations, or even partial differential equations. So it is not a general purpose machine. You will not see a paradigm shift to get rid of all digital computers and replace them by analog computers, although I personally would love that thought. But what you will see is you will see the rise of something called a hybrid computer, the combination of a digital machine and an analog computer. The analog computer will basically act as a very energy efficient and very fast coprocessor to solve nasty mathematical problems, while the digital computer serves as a user interface, serves to control and configure the analog computer. So that is what we are also planning to do. Our next step is to develop an analog computer on a chip that can be automatically reconfigured. What you see behind me, for example, is this patch panel here. As much fun as it is to patch a program on a patch panel like this, that's not really suitable for the 21st century. So what you have to do is to get rid of patch panels like these. And if you have an analog computer on a chip, you can, not easily, but you can afford to have tens of thousands of analog switches, which are in fact controlled by a digital computer. So you will develop your analog computer setup as usual, and then you will have a compiler like for an FPGA, a field programmable gate array, and you will have something like a compiler for a field programmable analog array, so to speak, that will compute which switches should be closed and open for a particular setup of the analog computer, and will thus configure your analog coprocessor chip and then feed the parameters and the data into the analog coprocessor and read out the results. So that is what we are currently working on, shrinking all this more or less ancient technology into a chip and making it reconfigurable and as high precision as possible to have an analog coprocessor for modern digital machines.
Hans, getting rid of the patch panel. Would that still be fun for you?
No. I'm really fond of the patch panels, uh, because it's yeah, I'm slow first of all, and not able to program in a digital environment. And I must say, the ability to just put in wires and experiment with a set of functions, that are there on the panel, it already is for me such an enormous amount of possibilities that I'm still happy to do. But of course, I understand Bernd's approach, because in the scientific world you have very complex problems to solve. And yeah, in this environment of an experimental electronic music studio, it will be just, yeah, a bit of fooling around, let's say. But I must say, I had a teacher and some students in physical modeling from Sonology, the Institute of Sonology from The Hague, and they tried this on the analog machine to make to search for the parameters for a specific patch, which was called the Van der Pol generator, Van der Pol generator. I see, I see Bernd smiling. You know the thing, right?
Yes.
It's a nearly chaotic thing. It's on the boundary of chaotic and controllable. So that was really fun to do that with students by, combining several functions and then try to find the right parameters, and then out of that, build it in hardware, right? In good modern electronics as a standalone, let's say, module or something. So that's also the nice thing about analog computers. They can be used as a sort of prototype, a sort of advanced breadboard system. So you have not the components. Yeah, you have some components, but a bit of higher level systems to work with, and that makes it very interesting to do some development on sound generating or voltage generating situations.
That cuts in right into a question I saw right now here from 1000 Nats Drum, probably, and Bruno Wiebelt. Hi, Bruno. Nice to see you again. The DIY modular synth scene is blooming. How feasible is making a DIY analog computer? Can you imagine something similar for analog computers? Yeah. So that sounds like something.
It's very feasible.
Absolutely.
If you have a look, yes, if you have a look at my homepage at analogmuseum.org, you will even find the schematics of a pretty simple but very usable analog computer developed by my late friend Dr. Vogel from Austria. Basically, an analog computer is pretty simple. All you need are pretty high precision operational amplifiers, and lots of these. But apart from this, you need precision resistors, precision capacitors, and a lot of either relays or modern electronic switches. But it's much simpler building an analog computer from scratch than building a digital computer from scratch.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and also the multipliers are now just on a chip. You can buy them cheap.
Yes, pretty cheap, about 10 euros per piece if you don't need too high precision. But if you strive for high precision, you can also pay 40, 50 euros for a single multiplier chip.
Yeah, that's true. But in fact, you could say for musical purposes, for experimental musical purposes, the high precision could be useful, but it's not really necessary.
Yes, definitely. Even if you do mathematics, the high precision is typically not required, only if you need inverse functions such as square roots or division circuits, which one typically tries to avoid. But only in these cases, you need really high precision analog multipliers.
Yeah. And it would also be always necessary to think about the things which are the real analog functions and which are a sort of logic functions to control. It would be interesting, for instance, the most basic part of the analog computer is the integrator, right? It's a device with
Yes.
an amplifier, with an input through a resistor and a feedback through a capacitor, right? But
Yeah,
there
and
is
that's
some.
basically where the magic.
That's absolutely the magic. Yeah, right. And then the switching is quite important. How you arrange that, and if you can control it with pulses or logic or flip flops or gates or pulses, then it becomes a very interesting module. So you need always to think about the hybrid part of the system.
Yes, for typical medium to simple mathematical problems, it's sufficient to have all integrators controlled by a single timing source. What I mean is the integrator is the only computing element in an analog computer that has a state. A summer, for example, just sums voltages or currents. But an integrator has three modes of operation. The first mode is initial value. In this mode, the integrator will set its output to an initial value that corresponds to the constant plus C that you may remember from school when you had Calculus 101, that there's always a constant of integration. That's your initial condition. The second mode of, nothing to worry on. The second mode of operation is operate. That is when the integrator actually integrates, and it has a third mode of operation that is halt. And in halt mode, the integrator stops integrating and keeps the last value it had. That is very useful, for example, for debugging purposes or to read out values. And if you have a look at large classic machines, right behind me is the analog patch panel of this Telefunken RA770, and you see that is absolutely dominating the overall machine structure. That has several thousand of connectors. That is where you can interconnect all of your computing elements. But it also has a small digital part. And this looks a little bit like an analog patch panel, but in fact, it's a bunch of simple digital elements, such as monoflops or flip-flops or counters and NOR gates and NAND gates and whatever. And you use this to implement simple logical functions. For example, if you have an optimization problem, you have some industrial process and you need to optimize some parameters. That is often done with something that is called steepest gradient descent. So you follow the steepest first derivative. And the idea is you have the analog computing solving the nasty problem to a certain point, and then you need a simple digital circuit that decides in which direction should you search further to find a minimum or a maximum. And for such simple decision-making circuits, most large analog computers, classic analog computers, featured a digital control panel like this as well. But for the majority of simple to medium problems, you don't need even this. If you have a look at the analog computer schematics by Dr. Vogel, you just have a 3-position switch to switch between initial condition, operated, halt, and that's fully sufficient for things like the bouncing ball simulation or the like.
Yeah.
Hans, one question. People would love to hear the system behind you, and I would absolutely love to hear. Because you said you had a patch prepared?
Yeah, I will put it on. What I did, actually, is this. I wrote it down. I hope you can see it. What you see here, where's my finger? Here's an integrator, right? And there's a second integrator. Oh, that's very.
Is it mirrored for you?
Yeah. Okay, so I've got here a patch where I made actually a damped oscillator, and instead of having potentiometers to control the frequency, I have exchanged them for multipliers, so I can be able to have voltage control here, right? And then what I did actually is the following. I made a pendulum. Yeah, so you have, let's say, oh, let me see. Yeah, you have a pendulum, and then it can swing, right? And now, the thing about initial condition is that you set the amplitude for the swing. So you set it, the initial condition, by putting 10 volts or something on the initial condition thing, and then you say compute, and then it starts to swing in a certain frequency, and then it dies out, right? When you vary the amplitude, the voltage to the initial condition, the amplitude will vary. So that is interesting. Then I decided to put a random voltage generator, the HP, what is called, whatever, a low frequency voltage, random voltage module, to give random variations of voltages to the initial condition. So let me see if it works. Oh yeah, there's one little story on the NASA guys that had large ranges of analog computers. They had enormous complex patches, and then sometimes the following day they came back, and then something didn't function, and therefore they decided to have a figure that is called the midnight patcher. So that was the one that fucks up the patch, right, for the next day. So hopefully the midnight patcher hasn't been here. Let me see.
Here's a free band name for everybody, the Midnight Patcher.
Right. So now you see on the scope the timeline, right? But a better way is to take both the integrator patches outputs to X and Y on the scope, and then you get a better view on the process. It is called phase plane plot. I hope you can see it.
I think it looks good.
And now I have a single damped sine wave, which really varies in amplitude. See? Make it a bit larger. And then I can also apply some external input, which I do with a function generator here, to modulate the sound. Normally, you put into the initial condition input a fixed value of voltage, but when you vary the voltage and the system is now on timer, so it starts the computation each time the timer starts, right? And it varies because of the initial condition input voltage is varying. And then you can tune it, of course. Let me see. Where am I? And I could also do that in low frequency mode. And then you can see that oscillation. And the damping, which is on 5, I guess. It's a nice representation of a damped waveform instead of having it like this, like in the time domain. See, it's mostly not really recognizable what is going on. But in the phase plane plot value, it is really good to see what is happening. And then I can use it as a control voltage for another. Can you hear this?
Yeah, what are you controlling right now?
I'm just putting out that voltage from the analog computer as a control voltage for a for an here this one.
HP 3312A.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
So that's the nice thing about an analog computer. It can run into the low frequency mode as a control voltage. It can be very, very slow. For instance, when you just run a small voltage into an integrator, it can make a ramp of 10 volts in about an hour or something. So you make a glissando of 1 hour with 10 volts, and when you apply that to a 1 volt per octave system, you have a glissando of 10 octaves in an hour. So that's really interesting. But you can also put it into audio frequency range. See? And you can really control all kinds of parameters.
And you've got 10 turn potentiometers, right?
Yes, yeah.
So the amount of control that you get is extreme, right? So you can really tune into the finest elements of sound.
Yeah, and even sometimes it's even necessary to put two 10-turn potentiometers in series to have even more control, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. When I in 2012, I think I was invited by Bernd to a symposium on analog. Think Analog was in the Humboldt Universität Berlin, and then for that I wrote a little article which kind of analog computer techniques could be useful for the analog synthesis community. So I will probably send this link also to you.
Please, I haven't read that. Yeah. That's super interesting. So,
yeah, because you visited Humboldt there.
I went there. Yeah, it was fun, and I still have to do the part 2 where we play.
Yeah.
It's Bernd, you corrected me. I think it's not Pong that they have up there. It's a different game, right?
I think it was Tennis for Two.
Yeah, Tennis for Two with gravitation and stuff. Yeah, it was exactly. Yeah. Oh, that was some deep sounds, Hans. That was
okay.
And the effect when you talk about these sounds, everything becomes very, very zen and relaxing. But it's probably like Bernd, you talked a bit about that. The beauty, I mean, the playfulness of the patch field is something special, but it also makes it hard to change stuff. I mean, how do you even change a patch? How long does it take you, Hans?
Huh? Let me tell you this. This analog computer has the removable patch panel option, which most larger I have. So now I can get it out. Take it out. This is the program. See? So this is what is called the problem board. You don't have to see it as a problem. It's just fun. But then you can see here all the contact points of all the modules and functions are brought together, so you can connect all things together. So now I have a second a program which we will hear later. I just inserted. And it's loaded.
That's such a satisfying sound. did it just
great.
move in?
Yeah.
Like when you it just moved in by itself, like one of those old school tape decks. Like
No, not. You have to use this handle,
yeah.
right? It's a handle.
Ah,
here.
okay. Ah, that was
Yeah.
that. Okay, so it was
Yeah.
almost automatic. Okay.
Yes. And then normally you have to set the parameters of the system of the program. But now, because the programs are quite simple, I have divided it between several things, so I can use both programs at the same time without readjusting all the parameters. And I think I must ask to Bernd, does the Telefunken M15 has motor controlled parameters?
Mostly, yes. You only have a couple of manual 10-turn potentiometers on large analog computers because you need typically hundreds of parameters. Setting all these manually is a horrible task. And larger analog computers typically had servo-driven 10-turn potentiometers. So you have a potentiometer coupled with a clutch and a motor and a servo circuit. And what you effectively do is you set the values you want to set your potentiometer on a keyboard and then press a key, set potentiometer, and the motor will turn the potentiometer to the desired position.
That's a really nice sound, is it?
Yeah, you hear it whirring.
Yeah.
Oh, that must be magical. I mean, I loved even like the cheesy stuff when the DigiDesign consoles, like audio consoles, they had the Vegas mode where everything moved and blinking lights got on. And there's something magic when you see like pots turning by themselves, faders moving, going to position.
It's a horror to maintain. After, in this case, more than 50 years, 53 years in this case, many of the cheap clutches got either sticky or slippery, so it's hard to get all the potentiometers work properly. Nowadays, one would use a digital controlled potentiometer like the AD5293 chip. That's a 10-bit digital potentiometer, which we also use in our analog computer and our homebrew analog computer when it's part of a hybrid computer setup. So you just have a bit stream that is shifted serially into a modern integrated circuit and acts as a 10-bit resolution potentiometer. So in fact, it has the same resolution as a 10-turn potentiometer. You can set down to 1,000ths, but you don't have to actually turn the knob or have a motor turn the potentiometer for you.
So you're telling me you have automation on your analog computers? That sounds...
Yes, if you like to, we have all kinds of modules developed. For example, a module with 24 digital potentiometers. We also have a crossbar module that's a 16 to 32 crossbar switch that can also be controlled by a digital computer. So you can basically pre-wire your analog program on the patch panel and then have the configuration completely under control of the digital computer. So you only have to wire it once, use one or more of these crossbar modules, which are under digital computer control, and then you really have a not integrated on a chip, but an analog computer that is completely controlled and configured by a digital machine.
Wow. Hans is gone for a second, so he'll be right back. but I just posted the website in the comments, so everybody can check out these beautiful machines. But I warn you, you will be lost. I mean, also I have to.
Maybe,
The first thing that struck me
maybe
when I looked at the site is how beautiful the photos are of this.
maybe, maybe you would also like to post the analogmuseum.org.
I already did that. Already did the analogmuseum.org. That's already posted. I
Yes.
think it should also be already in the description.
Okay,
So
great.
yeah,
You will
of the
find
show.
lots of introductory stuff there, even videos and slide sets and classical documentation, scans of classic books, whatever. So that is a good starting point if you are interested in analog computing.
Yeah, I think all roads lead to Rome. All analog computing research roads lead to Ulmann, I would say.
Basically, yes. And honestly, if you happen to be in the middle of Germany near Frankfurt, feel invited to visit us and visit the Analog Computer Museum. Most of the machines are can be operated and used. So if you want to try your own programs or patches, feel invited to come and visit us.
I will personally come, definitely.
Yes, I hope.
I don't know who from the chat would want to come here. We've got people from Mexico. Hi, Santiago Rodriguez. It might be a little long way, but I mean, that is also that's one of the beautiful things is discovering these kind of places, like it's magical. Like visiting Hans' studio was for me so magical and such a learning experience, which I still feed from like every day. I feel in my work, and yeah, this computer museum is like like since a year I've been dreaming of coming by. But I have to say, that's something I want to ask Hans, because I want to know like how long it took him as someone who has an aversion to maths to get into this, and I sadly. You helped me go troubleshoot my Dornier, and we figured out what worked, what didn't work. And it was a dive into cold water for me because I didn't know much. I only know like passive things. So I did a passive patch with I would call a passive patch where I just use a function generator down here. Let me solo that. So move the camera a bit for everybody. So what I did was like just to get the round ball for the simulation, I used the function generator with a sine and a cosine, because that's math I can still do. And I summed that with the control signal that controls the bounds. And I just did that by plugging it into now where did I do that? I think I did it here. So I plugged one signal there, and one went into the X and one went into the Y. So a simple summing operation I did. I tried to optimize the path of it, and I realized when I multiplied the signal with itself, I would get a different, like a visually nicer path, which I also tried. But I couldn't get, like, I still have to work out how the integration exactly works. And that's fun. I had such a fun day today trying to figure out different things to do. I'm just happy to try out, to have now just a little thing working on this. So, but it's playful. It's absolutely playful.
Yeah, that's pretty unique to an analog computer. If you want to program a digital computer, you have to be able to program it. You need a programming language, or at least assembly code or whatever. But with an analog computer, you can either approach the machine from a mathematical point of view, what is basically what I love to do, but you can also see it, as I already said, a big Tinker Toy kit for grown-ups, and just play with the mathematical functions without the mathematical background required to set up something useful, or something that sounds nice or yields pretty pictures on an oscilloscope tube.
Mm-hmm. I've got one question from the chat. I'll pull it up here. That's no name, but I think he also has your book, I think. Can you ask Mr. Ulmann what types of problems he finds himself solving with analog computers regularly?
That is a good question. As of at the moment, I'm pretty deeply buried in reaction kinetic problems from chemistry and pharmacology. There you have typically pretty complex systems of differential equations which describe how various compounds, for example, react with each other, or, for example, how some substance gets modified in the body of a test person or a patient or the like. So at the moment, I'm pretty basically working on reaction kinetic systems. But I also have done problems from other areas, such as signal transmission circuits, for example. I often use the analog computer even as a signal generator. When, for example, I develop some electronic circuits for other purposes, it's often useful and handy to have a sine wave generator or whatever. And of course, there are sine wave generators and whatever. But if you have an analog computer, you have a function generator that can generate whatever function you need, even a random function if you have a random generator in your analog computer. So the analog computer is really something I use in my daily work, even regardless if I develop electronics or if I do real research.
Mhm. One question that is from Bruno Wiebold. Has anybody envisioned to use frequencies and harmonics in computing?
That is a good question. The only thing that comes to my mind right now are the parametron parts that were developed in Japan for digital computers. Mr. Goto, if I remember correctly, developed the parametron. Don't know how it's pronounced in English. And that basically represents the two binary values of 0 and 1 as two harmonic waves. And the phase relationship between signals represents the bits that are transferred and worked on in the digital machine. But apart from that, at the moment, I don't know of any applications right now, except, for example, synchros and servos from the aerospace technology. If you have an angle resolver that transmits typically the angle that is set on the axis as a set of harmonic signals, which can then drive synchro or whatever. So harmonic signals to represent values are pretty common, especially in the aerospace technology, but to really use them in computing, the only thing that comes to my mind are the Japanese developments in the area of parametrons.
Goto is also a perfect name for someone working in computers, I have to say.
Definitely.
Silly joke, but still.
Yes.
Okay, I see Hans is back. I'll do this different layout so we can see you. Hello, Hans, can you hear us?
Yeah,
Hi.
yeah, I'm there.
Perfect. You still owe us the second patch. We haven't heard that.
Oh my God. Yeah, but it's just it's 4 damped oscillators tuned, and it was meant to be maybe a sort of sound field for you to improvise with. So it is controlled, by the way, by the word generators.
Mm-hmm.
So they sent out, you have 4 damped oscillators that are individually pinged by the pulses from the word generator. And I also used a multiplier just to have a sort of ring modulator sound, to combine.
A ring that's funny because like the first thing that I patched up when I was working, just trying to figure out how the analog computer works a ring modulator patch using just the multiplier.
Yeah, it's simple.
Yeah.
It's a ring modulator. You have the old-fashioned way, which is a diode ring, actually. But later on, like the electroharmonics frequency analyzer ring modulator, you have also, it's a multiplier, actually. So, it does ring modulate. So I will now, in this case, I just put the machine on compute, so it will be constantly having to simulate the resonators, 4 different resonators, and they are pinged. the nice thing about that system is that it learned me that an oscillator and a filter are in some way in this design connected, right? So that's really interesting. So I put it on blah blah blah.
Could you just
Sorry.
1 second? What do you mean with that? That sounds like an interesting thing.
Yeah. Normally, when you have a filter, right? You in an analog module of a synthesizer, then you have the resonance on 0, right? And you have a filter, and then you turn up the resonance, and it starts to have a bit of a peak in the frequency you filter, and then when you turn it a bit higher, it starts to oscillate, right? And in this circuit, it's just the way around. It is normally resonating, so it becomes a sine wave oscillator, and then by putting in damping, it reduces the amount of resonance and frequency, so it becomes a damped oscillator. So they are it's the same frequency. It's like you know what the one you also have we talked about in the ARP. Those let me
The
see,
PAR
where are they?
189 up top.
Yes, yes. When you know you can filter and you put the Q up. Q is
Yeah.
resonance, right? And then you get to sine wave oscillation, which is Q maximum actually. And then you have an oscillator, a sine wave oscillator. See, so that one is also it's just the same analog circuit I've built here. It's really Bernd could do the mathematics. It's a second order differential equation. And then it stops for me, but that's a thing. But it has a damping parameter, and yeah, you can just ping it like you do the same with the selective amplifier from EG&G. Let
And
me
just
see
for everybody who doesn't know, pinging means sending a short impulse trigger, causing the
Yes.
system to resonate.
Yeah.
So,
And-
and the word
and-
generators that you're using for that, they're basically, you can think of them in musical terms, they would be trigger generators, or they would just be rhythm generators in that regard, right? Like they provide a set of pulses that are rhythms, right?
Ah,
That
yeah,
they use to
okay.
get-
Yeah,
So
yeah,
and they ping the system basically.
Yeah. I noticed that in one of your latest videos, you had the problem of filters that respond 2 times
Double
to
triggers,
a pulse.
yeah.
Double triggers.
Rising edge and falling edge, yeah.
Right, and that's the point. When you make a rhythm with that kind of filters and resonant filters and try to trigger it, you should do the timing from the rising edge and the leading edge. So with the word generator, for instance, you can put several pulses behind so they can connect. So they have a boom on the upside, and then a count, and then boom from the downside.
Yes, when you just say it, it's so obvious. It's just so obvious. That's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
good, of course. It's so
Yeah.
obvious. But I found that the one thing that I liked is that, like, especially, sorry for going a little bit off topic here right now, everybody, but the Rode and Schwarz UBM just loves all these different shapes. And especially
Absolutely.
from the track, I've discovered the love for Tektronix TM500 format. And the pulse generators in there just are gorgeous, and
Yeah.
like you can what they do to like the ping is amazing. So it's I've never like I tried HP, not as good as the Tektronix so far.
Okay.
And yeah, so yeah, if you but you probably have tried TM500 stuff, right?
I've never used Tektronix stuff, so no. Sorry.
Okay. No. I'll make a video on that because it's like my new favorite test equipment modular format with third-party developers and all that stuff.
Great.
And
Okay.
last thing, they've got the second best bass drum. No.
Oh, whoa. Okay.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the analog computer.
Let me try this. Then I have to go to the mixing desk to check this.
You can move it a little bit more so we can see the mixing desk.
Yeah. You hear this one?
Yeah. Beautiful groove.
So now I've just made 2 patterns here, and they are assigned here to the analog computer. I will try to show you that all 4 are triggered. You see all 4 are triggered, and I can change the frequency. Now I put damping down, so they become sine wave oscillators.
So when you are just on full blast, that's where is the damping removed from the function, right?
Right, exactly. And the nice thing about this is that you can do that very precisely. So I thought this could be some sort of background that would be something for you to make some sounds to.
So you mean to jam on together?
Yeah,
that would be
why not?
Absolutely amazing. That would be
Why
absolutely amazing. Chat, shall we jam now and then go more to questions? And
that's fine.
because I've got the thousands of questions.
Oh, really?
So no, because about this, I mean, I feel it is. The beautiful thing for me is I feel like again I'm learning, and it's
So
I
am
love
I.
the feeling. I love the feeling of learning, and that's okay. So yeah, I'll see what I can do to that. So switch to camera 2, and take the solo away. Hand solo away. So okay, camera 3 maybe. Okay.
Are we
Let's see
doing
what I can
something
do to
on?
that.
Are we doing something on A440 tuned or?
You know what? I'm gonna use the Syntrax first because that I can tune like with the joystick. So same as
Alright.
last time we jammed, I'll be playing something synthy-like.
All right.
Thank you, Hans. Oh. Ooh. That's such a trippy beat. Well, if that wasn't a world first, jam with analog computers through a live stream, and yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, great.
That was good. That was really yeah. I even got the bouncing ball patch in there again. So
Yeah,
I
great.
think, yeah, and it was harmonically sound. I mean, we're tuned together.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I mean, like we hadn't planned that we were tuned together, but your bell, your rhythm, that was in tune from the first note on. I didn't move the joystick at all. That's 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 something special. I wish there was. I wish we should. I didn't hit record. I should have hit record, and you should have hit record. So then we would have like be able to. We
Yeah.
didn't. I didn't. So sorry, Chad. But yeah, whoo, that was. I feel very very good now.
Okay,
Um,
great.
so shall we get to more questions from the chat? And just speaking about music, there's one question that was from Stuart Foster early on, very early on in the chat. And he asked, are these both musicians? Are their discographies listed anywhere? Hans, I know you've got some releases, right? So your music can be found on which site?
Well, I have a SoundCloud page.
Let's plug the
for,
SoundCloud.
Telefunken Atelier,
Okay.
but I didn't release anything of my music. No. Yeah, I
Okay.
did some recordable CD-ROMs or whatever.
Okay.
And of course, CDs are breaking down as soon as you want to play it. So I just forget about it.
You mean CDRs? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, CDRs. Yeah,
Yeah.
those.
But you've got a SoundCloud, and so does Bernd. Bernd has got a SoundCloud, and
Yes,
there are
just
recordings.
this session, and it sounds horrible what I produced.
No. There's one thing we have to talk about this. I'm going to drop like this link first, and you can autoplay on SoundCloud. That's very loud. Ooh. So I'm going to drop this link in the chat for you all to check out. And here we go. So this is two oscillators, which was done on an FPAA board that you can buy now, and it's just about $90 last time I checked, I think. And that could be, I think, so check out all the things there. There's lovely like analog computers. This is the FPAA board.
Right.
And
Yes.
maybe, Ben, you can talk a bit about this.
I also got it only a couple of days earlier from in the mail. That is from zrna.com. I'm not affiliated with the guys from zrna. I just bought this board since it features a field programmable analog array made by Anodyne. And has an STM32 processor as well, which you can use to configure the analog array. And I tinkered a little bit with this board, and the result of this can be heard in the track Two Oscillators, where I have basically configured two sinusoidal oscillators on the field programmable analog array, which are then mixed together, and I I vary the frequencies of both of these oscillators. So these boards are pretty cheap and a lot of fun to program. You can download a Python library from zrna.com, which has an object-oriented interface for all the functions and for the reconfiguration of the FPAA on this board, which is a lot of fun.
Is that like, because New Ninja, he had a question before related to FGPAs, but is this something related or is it entirely different?
The idea is basically the same. An FPGA, a field programmable gate array, is an inherently digital system where you can reconfigure the interconnection of more or less a sea of macro cells. An FPAA is a field programmable analog array, so you don't have digital macro cells, but you have configurable analog blocks, CABs. These have the same role like the macro cells in an FPGA, but are fully analog, and you can interconnect these on a chip. So an FPAA is basically, at the moment at least, a simple version of an analog computer on chip. The FPAAs used here, made by Anodyne, they use a switched capacitor technology for the interconnect, which is great for audio and signal processing purposes, since you get, for example, a low-pass filter for free due to the switched capacitor configuration, but it's not too well suited to do mathematics on these FPAAs. So I'm personally not that interested in this switched capacitor technology.
I am very interested in that.
It's
I'm
awesome.
definitely, yeah. I'm gonna put. I was going to put this into my what's called my shopping basket. Was immediately going to buy this, but then I saw they also made the DSP. I think like advanced axolotl thing. So I think that's what you called it. So I was like, oh, I need both. But then how much time do I have in my life to do both? But at least I wanna try that board, because you're doing a filter sweep, and it's a very nice filter sweep at that.
Yeah.
And a very nice filter sweep in that format, which is, by the way, because I know there are some people of you that are deep into DIY here in the chat. This is Eurorack sized. So you could put this this board into a Eurorack module and develop your own synthesizers on that, or your own modules. So that seems something, the DIY community will love. And I think that's also a nice way to get at least some taste of analog computing on a budget. Because even like the patch that I demoed in the beginning on Maths, the bouncing ball patch, Maths is not a Eurorack, that's kind of expensive, but this board is just like, $90, and you need a USB cable, because it comes with all the audio outs, and you can just start doing a bit of analog computing for audio. That sounds nice. So that's something, I'm also not affiliated with them, but I know I wanna something I find magical to have, that this exists and puts some part of the technology in the hands of everybody. Yeah. Because, I mean, Hans has probably all the Hitachis now, so.
No. One, but there's
One
also no, there's also one in Rotterdam in the conservatory analog studio, run by the teacher and composer René Uilhoed, and that one is also operational. So there's some alive. Yeah.
That is something that I'm completely interested in also. Is there like places for people all over the world where they could go, like, to see like your analog computer museum, Bernd? Or is there something, or like Willem Twee? Do you know of other places in the world that are as special for this?
Not really. The Computer History Museum in Moffat Field has a pretty decent collection of analog computers, but these are not operational and cannot be used for experiments or cannot be demonstrated. There are some hobbyists that preserve analog computers, but to my knowledge, there is no other accessible collection of classic and modern analog computers anywhere.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I have a long term contact with an electronics engineer from California, Dan Slater, which is now in aeronautics, I guess. But he had, in the early 20s, late 90s, he had a website where he combined analog computer technology with a Buchla synthesizer, for instance. And I had contact with him then, but he was so much spammed by persons that wanted to buy the stuff that he took all the information offline, you know. But he was really, I think he was really doing interesting things with analog computers and analog synthesizer combinations, right? So, and of course you got David Rosenboom, the composer, which is, to my knowledge, the first one to really made a piece for analog computer and analog synthesizer. It was in the 70s, I guess. The piece was brought out on a cassette, and to my surprise, it was a label from this very town, Slow Scan. Yeah, completely nuts. And I typed a letter to him. It was pre-internet typing. Oh, sorry. And yeah, he responded in not giving too much information on how he used it, what was it, the purpose, etc. So that was a bit of a sorry. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, there are not many places. I would like to go to Kiel, a place in Germany, Upper Germany. What is it called? The harbor place, right?
Hafen, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a museum, a maritime museum, and there is the Telefunken RA800, and that is
Yes.
It's really my favorite machine. It should be. Oh my God!
Predecessor of this one, yes.
Yeah. It
What
would
makes
be
it special?
so great. Yeah, it's the feel, it's the look, it's the arrangement of things, it's the controls, it's the, you have to stand operating it. Yeah, it's the look.
And it was the first European precision analog computer. Before
Oh, really?
the 800, if you needed a precision analog computer capable of 4 digits resolution, you had to buy a machine from Electronic Associates or one or the like. So this got Europe in the first of precision analog computing, the RA800.
Ah, yeah, right.
The one they have in Kiel is the RA800H that has a hybrid interface, like my machine here.
Yeah, great.
Now for the book.
That's this one, right? Is
Yes.
it on? Oh, right. Put it on.
Here you see 2 of the 3 racks that comprise a fully fledged RA800H system.
That's beautiful. The
Yeah, it's
aesthetics
really
on this. Oh,
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
I mean,
and
that's so important. I mean, like for an instrument, any instrument, like a research instrument, be it a computer, be it, like any instrument. It has, if it looks like inviting.
yeah, precisely. And it's in racks, I like things in racks. It's
But it's no longer tabletop or the like. It's even heavier than the RA770. This one weighs in excess of half a ton, and the RA800 is about 1 ton.
Oh my
The
God.
computer behind you weighs half a ton.
Yes, 550 kilograms.
Okay. Yeah, everybody keeps like scaring me like about all the amount of test equipment they have. Oh, you must have strong floors. I was like, nah.
Yeah. And they are right to scare you. That is the real problem. We have specially reinforced concrete flooring in the basement for one of the machines. One of my machines, the EAI Pacer 700, weighs 2.5 tons, and you cannot even put this in a normal basement because it will crack.
Yeah.
I'm just looking over there. I think like books are heavier than this. There's a lot of airspace. In my racks, there's a lot of space. I keep the airflow going. No, Hans, can you put like that? Can you send me all the books that you would recommend? I'm going to put, because Shuffled 909 asked like what was the book, and the computer was called Telefunken AR800, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And my question to that was, is that functional in Kiel?
No, it is not,
Okay.
Unfortunately. Many years ago, I tried to get the machine from them. I even offered them a perverse amount of money to get this machine, but they rightfully kept the machine, but it's not restored and not up and running. I have a book recommendation as well. This one, Analogrechnen by Gillois and Lauber.
Yeah.
It looks very unassuming, but that is basically my personal Bible. That's the Old Testament, so to speak, that was published in, I think, 1963. And you can still find it in used bookstores or zvab.com. If you are interested in the mathematics behind analog computer programming, that is the classic work to read.
Awesome. Yeah, we're going to
But
again. We're
but
compiling
that's
a list.
sorry, yeah, that's in German, right?
Yes, it's in
And
German.
yeah, I could also recommend the books from the couple Korn and Korn,
Corn, yes.
and they have brought out a lot of books. You must know there is a lot of literature on analog computing, and you should not forget that historical development, because I think, for instance, I think a lot of electronic music synthesis equipment was developed out of the technology that was made by analog computing. So let's say the filters, the multipliers, the sample and hold, the track and hold, all those kind of functions, really were already there in the analog computer. And of course, ARP, well, we talked about it, about the analog computer circuit that brings out the filter. But also Moog, I came across in some early document that his VCA design was based on analog computing technology. So I think at that time the guys in electronic engineering were really aware about aware of the analog computing literature.
And and of course, it makes sense to reuse these circuits. I mean,
Yeah,
to use them for different purposes in the end, like to
yeah,
create a synthesizer. All that the circuit is already developed, so let's see where you can take it and
yeah,
put it into something different.
yeah, absolutely.
No. Well, I would say, is there anything you guys would like to say more or would like to talk more about? Because then we would go to to do a quick Q&A. If you've got questions now, please put them to our guests or to me. And I think I tried to pull up all the questions that came in between. If your question didn't get pulled up and I missed it, yeah, please ask it again, and then we can do a little Q&A about that.
And I have
And
to rely on you relaying the questions to me because it's too small. I can't read it with these glasses.
of course, I will do. And I discovered this function that you can actually up these questions on the
Yes,
screen
that
now.
Oh,
was very
That's
nice.
useful.
I didn't know that before. I should have used that a lot more. But yeah. So if there are questions, please ask them now. And yeah. And one thing, like Hans, you might also know that. Would what are so I've already put the David Rosenbaum Roundup, a live electroacoustic retrospective. I think that was the album that you meant. That was the one
I'm
that
not
was
sure.
released on that Herzog and Bosch label. And
Slow scan.
a slow scan, yeah.
Yeah.
So are there any other important analog computer albums or that you
No,
would
really,
probably
not
know
that
right
I
now?
know. Not that I know. Really.
Okay.
So that's typical, but it is. Yeah, it's not. Analog computers were, of course, very, very, very expensive. So not
Mm-hmm.
really approachable for musicians.
Mm-hmm.
That also happened, of course, with the first digital computers. But yeah, focus then shifted really to digital computing because of the ideas of serialistic thinking in electronic music. So really defined parameters, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no. But the last thing, so a guy that worked here in our studio is the Italian, which is living in your town, by the way,
In
Berlin.
Berlin. Mm-hmm.
Andrea Taigi.
Mm-hmm.
He worked here in the studio quite a lot, and he recorded some records with this machine here. So Andrea Taigi is the most, I think, the most recent releases of music with analog computers.
Okay, we'll have to check that out and put it in the
Yeah.
final show notes after this is done. Okay.
Yes.
So we got a lot of questions right now. They're all coming in. So we're gonna start from the top. Um, that's differential. I don't get this one. Operation amplifiers. Okay. Okay. So I got. Here's one question from Daniel Pravder. The mathematics is primarily differential equations. Can you simulate systems of PDE?
Yes, yes, and yes. The normal food for an analog computer are systems of ordinary differential equations, but you can also solve partial differential equations. A typical approach for this would be to discretize space in one direction and have one dimension like time in a continuous way. If you have a look at the application notes at analogparadigm.com, my website, there's a documentation tab, and you find a lot of application notes, I think 27 by now. There are 2 application notes dealing with solving, for example, the heat equation on an analog computer, on an active analog computer, and with passive resistor and capacitor networks. So yes, you can solve both types of differential equations, but partial differential equations are definitely more nasty than systems of ordinary differential equations.
Chao Tome asks, can I visit your museum? Of course, it's not a museum, it's an active studio. And where is it?
It's in the Netherlands, in the south of the Netherlands. It's in the city called 's-Hertogenbosch or Den Bosch. And you can rent the studios at any time for parts of 4 hours or a day or whatever. And just visit our website, Willem2 .nl, and you can find information on the studio and how to book a studio. You're welcome anytime.
Link should be already in the description, unless I put it in there, I think. So it should be there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So, and okay. Shuffled 909, question for Hans. I've seen pics of a number of electronic music artists at your studio. Is there any talk of a compilation album of music created there?
Not a compilation album, but because every artist has put out his own releases so far. So, yeah. Just check the Discogs page of Willem2 Studios, and you'll see the different releases of albums which contain recorded material here.
It is also very difficult to put out a compilation release in regards to managing rights, publishing rights. Some artists are represented by a publishing agency, some are not. And then when you try to release it, you have to basically put up a label for that and to just get it like on Spotify and everything. And you have to pay a bunch of money, actually. It's like, it's not that easy to do a compilation release. What I found is a good alternative is just make a DJ mix. Just make a mix for Mixcloud, put all the tracks together and say, here, this is a compilation of all these. Ask everyone for their permission and say, hey, can I use the track? Oh, of course, yes or not. And then include all the tracks that are there. Make a DJ mix, use that as a reference, or even make like a little YouTube video where you've got like footage from the studio, maybe even footage from the time that the people there, if they have it, and then just put it out like that. And that's hassle-free, and you don't have to worry about all these things. You might still get copy striked, but then you can probably, if you got the permission before, it should be easier. But you don't have to become a label for that. So, Roman Weingart, is there a Van der Pol oscillator available in hardware form?
It wouldn't be too difficult. The Van der Pol equation and solution on analog computer is described here as well. It's basically an amplitude stabilizing oscillator that was developed by Van der Pol in the 1920s when he was researching the oscillator driving our heart. So it is pretty simple to set up a Van der Pol here. That is the computer setup for the Van der Pol equation.
Yes, solo.
So you see you need 2 integrators, 2 summers, and 2 multipliers. You have an oscillator. So it's
So that
not too difficult to set up as a discrete component.
so it's easy to DIY something like that, right?
Yes, definitely. There's also an application note on the Van der Poel oscillator on the Analog Paradigm homepage.
And of course, that's from your book, Analog and Hybrid Computing, out on Integrator. So, next question. Heathkit. Oh, yes. Heathkit had an analog computer. A8H. Yeah, I just saw one. Looks
Yeah,
so good.
he in fact had two analog computers. One was a pretty impressive computer in a pult-like desk. That is pretty rare, and Heathkit also had a pretty simple analog computer for educational purposes, the EC1, which lacks nonlinear elements. So it has only summers, and basically it only has operational amplifiers. Even if you want to have a summer, you need external resistor networks. And if you need an integrator, you. So these analog computers made by Heathkit are very, very basic and simple, and are vacuum tube based. So be careful when restoring one of them. If I remember correctly, the linear voltage regulator has 570 volts input to yield the the regulated plate voltage for operational amplifiers. So it's a little bit tricky to keep these up and running.
Yeah, that's also very dangerous. I mean, like just
Yeah.
patching, right? How much voltage runs through the patch cables even?
Typically, vacuum tube-based analog computers had machine units, as they are called, of plus and minus 100 volts.
Hundreds, yeah.
And since the operation amplifiers of such tube-based analog computers are typically capable of outputting up to 20 milliamperes, it hurts a lot. Ask me, it hurts a lot. The first rule you learn after being shocked more than once is first plug a cable into the input of a computing element and then plug it into the output of another element, not the other way around, because as I said, it really hurts a lot.
I'm not complaining anymore about getting shocked by the Rodenschwarz UBM. I'm not complaining about that anymore because that does the same thing, but just 25 volts, I think. Yeah, it's negligible. Okay, cool. So, but I have to say that computer, it looks beautiful. They look very steampunk. They look very British. They've got a really nice style. I'll be putting up a video. Like, hopefully, I just need to edit it. It's from the Signal Labor. Right at
Berlin.
At Berlin Humboldt University, and there's also, you can see one there. You can see a Telefunken there. There's lots of analog computers in there. I'm just waiting to basically I just need time to edit that, so there you can see more of these lovely machines.
I saw there's also an East German computer. What's the name again?
MEDA 42.
Yeah, MEDA. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, the MEDA.
Yes, I have a MEDA 43 here.
Ah, nice.
But a pain to repair. It
Oh,
still needs some tender love and care. And interestingly, all these machines from Eastern Bloc states, of course, use non-standard components. You will not find a matching transistor to replace something, even something as simple as a 10-term potentiometer. They look completely different compared with the Beckmann potentiometers we used here in the Western countries. So it's really difficult to keep these Eastern Bloc machines up and alive.
Ah, well. But there is one museum that is, huh?
Yes, the MEDA 42. I did parts of the repair of this machine when I was in Berlin many years ago. That's basically up and running. Yes.
Yeah.
And it looks very Eastern Bloc style.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
There should be like a picture book, like a coffee table book of all the analog computers.
Yes,
Like,
I always planned to do something like this, and we at least did a calendar for friends and family with computer pictures for every month. If someone wants to volunteer for a project like this, feel invited. Take as many photos as you want, and I can also give you many photos from my collection. That would be great.
stick around after we finish this. YouTube, you don't like hit quit immediately. We talk about that. I've got an idea. So, Xenon Drakensberge. Oh, Dragon Mountain, right? Why did the general public lose interest in analog computers?
That's an interesting question, and the answer is at least twofold. One reason was that digital computers became cheaper and cheaper. Although a digital computer could not really compete with an analog computer even in the 1980s, it was so cheap that it was cheaper to wait a couple of hours for a solution than to have an analog computer sitting there being serviced and maintained all the time. And the second reason was analog computing, electronic analog computing, basically started in the second half of the 1940s. The first electronic analog computers were developed independently in the United States by George A. Philbrick and in Germany by Helmut Hölzer in the first half of the 1940s. But due to World War II, these developments did not really catch on. So analog computing started all over the globe basically after World War II. This meant that they found a wide distribution on Earth, and all of the professors in universities using analog computers for their actual research and for teaching purposes were roughly at the same age. And in the end, in the late 1970s, most of these professors quit. They got too old, and the new professors, of course, had to do things differently than their predecessors. And if you get a professor and your predecessor did everything with an analog computer, of course, you have to say, we will do everything differently. We will do everything digitally. And so analog computing really died out in the mid-80s because the people were no longer actively working in the field. That was the second reason why analog computing got more or less forgotten in the last decades.
Very. So next question, that's from Noise Miolci, and that's a question that I've seen before. Also, that was asked also by Amphiprion Visual Music. So does maths qualify as an analog computer? And that's probably a difficult question to answer because I don't know if you, Bernd, know what maths even is, or you, Bernd. Like, it's a Eurorack module, basically.
Okay.
And so I can show it to you, and maybe we can discuss it. Basically, it's what I use to make the bouncing ball patch.
Okay.
So that's the heart of the heart of the bouncing ball patch. I'm just going to switch to the module now. So you can see it here. I will just unplug the cables after in the right bit so you can see a bit more. But basically, it's...
Can you make it larger?
I'll move the camera. Let's see. Because
Yeah,
it's not a very
take
zoomable
Hans
camera.
and me out of the picture so we have full screen.
Of course I will. So give me a second. And solo here on the maths. So, and so now I'm going to, so this is the patch that I set up. So I just talk for 1 second about the patch. So basically, you've got, this is a VCA, but it's an LPG, like a low pass gate, which acts as a VCA in this. And this processes an audio signal from an oscillator. And that makes the sound of the bouncing ball. The bum, 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 bum. So that's how I set this up. I'm now going to tear down all these cables so you can see what the actual functions on this module are. Okay? So taking it all off. I have to kind of lean over. So because I have this computer in the most this module in the most inconvenient position you can imagine. I have to stretch. But let me take out all of these too. So, all right. Just leave them hanging around. So, I hope you can see it all clear. So, what we have here are basically a rise and a fall function generator. That's channel 1 with a trigger, so you can cycle it. It will cycle like at the speed that you set it here. This bulb is broken, so, and you can also trigger it, and you can use it to process external signals through here. This comes then out through this attenuator, so you can make it negative and positive, and it has an out here and an out here, just a multiple. And then you can set it to logarithmic or linear response. All the way left, logarithmic, and linear and exponential. Sorry, exponential is to the right, linear in the middle, logarithmic to the left. And you've got inputs to modulate the rise and the fall and both. And that's the same on the other side. You can see this is just a mirror image. And in the middle, we've got a attenuator that will also generate a voltage between -5, I think, and +5. I think it's bipolar. And you've got 2 of those. You can process the signal with it, but you can also generate, and it comes out here. Then you've got a sum function, which will sum all of these outputs, like from 1, 2, 3, and 4, or only from, if you plug something in here, that connection is cancelled. So you will not get that then from the sum or the OR. You've got an end of cycle out, and here you've got an, I think it's end of the high, when it goes to the highest thing. No, end of release, I think, and end of cycle. These are the outs you have. And as I said, you can set these to loop, basically, or you can trigger them externally. So would something like this qualify as an analog computer?
From a philosophical point of view, yes, since you program it basically by patching. But from a practical point of view, it's the machine right behind me, for example, my RA770 also has, for example, function generators for logarithmic functions, exponential functions, and the like. So this, I personally would see this as a module which would be part of a bigger analog computer setup, but a specialized module implementing some mathematical functions like log and x, but not an analog computer in itself.
Okay. So what kind of modules would you think you would need? Would you need something? Yeah. What kind of modules would you add to make this more of an analog computer? Like
a real analog computer, yeah, a real analog computer definitely needs integrators. These are the heart of the analog computer, and these are where really the magic happens. That you can do a time integration with a dedicated module. So you would need this, and you would need multipliers as well, since with only these functions and integrators, you could, for example, not implement something like a Van der Pol oscillator, which requires two multipliers, for example.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to the next question. That's from Bruno Wiebelt. Let's show and see. Oh, okay, perfect. And then go back to a different view. And
that's a very good question. Are quantum processes to be simulated in analog computers? And the answer is yes, I'm pretty sure. That is one area we are also working on. And we are working together with some quantum physicists on this question. At first glance, what you basically have to do is you simulate oscillators. Schrödinger equation is basically an oscillator in one or more dimensions. So I'm pretty sure that an analog computer is very well suited to simulate quantum processes, and may at least be more efficient in doing so than using a digital computer to simulate quantum processes. But that is really a topic in active research, in current research.
Next question, section Z. Can Hans discuss the multiplier unit in getting ring modulation on test equipment? Background, section Z is starting to build his own test equipment mega studio, and he's very active also like on the subreddit. Yeah, so hi section Z.
That's cool, just to be to go diving into this. There is, of course, a multiplier ring modulator thing out there on test equipment. It's also for EG and G. It's on the top there. It's let me see there.
193. Is it the one?
It's the 193 multiplier divider unit.
I'm so hunting for that. That's like the last holy grail I think I have, except for the spectrum shaper.
Yeah. But you know, there are a lot of very cheap ICs, chips over there to have just a multiplier and build it for cheap. It can be done quite easily, I think. Yeah, in DIY.
But that's not the style I'm going for.
I
Okay.
probably, by the way, would suggest something like the AD633 as a multiplier chip from Analog Devices that costs about, I think, 8 or 10 euros per piece and has reasonable performance figures. If you need high precision analog multiplication, you should go for the AD734, but that's about 30 to 40 euros per chip. So for typically audio applications where you don't have a problem with a little DC drift, the AD633 should definitely be sufficient.
Quick
by the
question
way,
regarding
sorry.
just a quick question. Do I have two multiplicators in the Dornier now? So
Yes.
Yeah.
I think you have two multiplication modules, and each of which has two multipliers.
Yeah, exactly.
If I remember the schematics correctly, they use the AD534, which is a higher precision than the suggested AD633, but they were pretty expensive back then.
Oh, I feel I got an upgrade.
Yeah.
Lovely. Awesome. Sorry, Hans, for stopping you there.
Just one question for Bernd. We know multipliers come there in 2-quadrant or 4-quadrant versions. Could you explain a bit more about that difference?
Yeah, if you multiply values, both of your values, x and y, can take on positive and negative values. A 4-quadrant multiplier is what you typically want nowadays, so you can multiply all combinations of signs with each other. Very old multiplier designs sometimes only had 2-quadrant operations, so you could multiply a value could be positive or negative with another value which only could be positive or only could be negative. But if you use modern integrated circuits like the aforementioned AD633 or 734, these are all 4-quadrant multipliers.
Yes.
We get one
Okay,
question from Henry
thank you.
Wild. Sirs, will you be playing a demo on these prominent equipments? We already did. So that's just something. This stream will be available, I think, a few hours until it's processed on YouTube. So you can always go back and, see what you can find in here. So it will be available. I will be keeping this up so you can check the part where we jammed, and which is pretty damn awesome. So, you can check that. How many more questions? We got some mass point. I'd like to have a Schrödinger's cat module. I think we're going.
Cat not included.
Yeah, and then we've got one question that I really don't know. Can you use AND gates as multipliers?
That is a very clever question. I think that you would think about stochastic computing. So the answer is yes, under certain circumstances. In stochastic computing, which is a variant of analog computing, you do not use voltages or currents to represent your values, but you use pulse density to represent your values. So you have a train of pulses, which is ideally modulated by a real random generator, not a pseudo-random generator. And if you have two variables, which each comprises of one stream of random pulses, you can multiply these pulse streams by just ANDing them together. So yes, you can use a simple digital AND gate as a multiplier, but you have to use a rather strange or arcane value representation. You might want to look up stochastic computing. The advantages of stochastic computing are you can basically program it like an analog computer. They are very, very unsensitive for errors. Of course, if you drop one pulse, a million pulses, it does not really change or make your result invalid. The problem is stochastic computers are pretty slow. So I don't think that's a practical application of an AND gate to be used as a multiplier in a stochastic computer setup.
I realize again that the audience is much smarter and has much more knowledge than I do. So I love that these kind of very specific questions pop up. Thank you, audience, by the way. Thank you, everybody.
I would like to add to the end thing that the design of the ring modulator circuit in the ARP Odyssey was in fact done with AND gates. It was not a really like the ARP 2600 multiplier balanced modulator type, but it was in fact, if you look at the schematics, it's an AND gate design. Just as a note. Sorry.
No, very good. So that's one question that I was thinking, like when I was on the train and was looking through your book, actually, also. So is there any way to simulate an analog computer such as VCV-Rack for the synthesizer world? So VCV-Rack is like Eurorack modular synthesizer in a digital format. It's an emulation. So is there a way basically to emulate an analog computer?
Yes. Yes, with certain drawbacks, of course. What we are currently developing, and is a couple of friends of mine and I, is such an emulator, which we already use in-house when we develop analog computer setups. So we can plan these on a classic digital computer and evaluate them and then transfer them to an auto-patch analog computer. So the answer is yes. And our software will be made available via GitHub as soon as it is ready. If you have access, for example, to MATLAB or some other professional mathematical package, MATLAB already has typical analog computer modules which you can plug together on a software basis to simulate the behavior of an analog computer. So the answer is yes.
Awesome.
There's also something called SPICE, right, Bernd?
Yes, SPICE does a low-level simulation of electronic circuits. So it would also be feasible to set up a SPICE simulation of a simple summer, simple integrator, and use this as an analog computer simulator. You could also write one yourself. The tricky part is to get the integration scheme right, because a simple Euler integration is not suitable for all cases that you will encounter in an analog computer application, especially when you have to deal with so-called stiff differential equations. Simple single-step integration schemes often will fail you.
We got a comment that's very interesting. That's from Joranalog, and that's just a helpful comment. Joranalog is I used some of his modules here in to create the sounds for the bouncing ball patch, and he says you can quite easily build good performing yet affordable multipliers using the 2164 quad VCA. Generate 3, which is the one that the reverse bass uses 3 of those. So that's just an addendum. There's one question. This is interesting because Christian Eduardo Rodriguez Perez. How much did those machines cost? I'm guessing like originally.
Yes,
originally first.
They were incredibly expensive. That is mostly due to the small number of machines that were typically built. So if you ordered, for example, an RA770, it took several months to get your machine because you specified what the complement of computing elements in the machine would be. And a full-fledged RA770, like the one sitting behind me, cost about 600,000 to 700,000 marks in 1967. And as a comparison, VW Beetle, the car, cost about 4,000 marks back then. So you could decide between having 150 cars or one cool analog computer.
Okay. Wow. Ooh, okay. So I think their list prices. I think like that Dornier here. I think that was like 6,900 if I remember correctly.
I think even more expensive. You may find the price list on my website. if you don't, I have the price list here. Even a simple module like an integrator module, one integrator module was about 400 or 500 marks.
Yeah, and
yeah,
we have to
yeah.
adjust that to, I think that's like 2,500, 3,000 euros or something in that, inflation
Definitely
adjusted.
more in euros, yes.
Yeah, so Eurorack is cheap regarding to that.
Oh, man.
You know, but yeah, so in regards to like what like this cost me, for example, when I bought this, when I bought this one, so this Donyedo 80, I think like you both said, oh, this is too expensive. I bought it for 1,000 euro. And I thought it was the only way I could get one of those. And the eBay Kleinanzeigen ad was really very weird. The guy was trying to make it fun. So, and he's a computer science who got this basically as a gift, I think. And he sold it and he bought Raspberry Pis for his course. Like I think he bought like 32 Raspberry Pi. Yeah, but at least his students got like something, and I got this, so which is so inspiring and beautiful. So yeah, so I think that was for this, in this condition that it is, it still needs work, but still I think that was like
that is the central point. If you get a classic analog computer, you can be sure that it is in need of repair. So the electrolytic capacitors in power supplies will long have since died. You will find faulty transistors due to, for example, whiskers in the enclosures, in the bond wires. You will find problems in the control circuitry. And it's pretty tricky to get these machines up and running again. I don't know if I mentioned this, but when I rescued this machine from scrap some time ago, it cost me, every machine that I have and that I repair gets its own dedicated machine logbook. And I write down everything that I do during a repair. For example, you can see which modules I tested and which modules did not work correctly and what I did to repair these modules. And after a while, such a notebook is basically full with written comments. And to get this machine up and running again took me 140 full-time hours.
Oh, man.
And it still has its quirks. Some function generators are still not working correctly, so you can typically expect several months of dedicated work to get a big machine up and running again.
Okay, we're going to like the last questions now. I think, yeah, that will be. I think the last two questions. I think here we've got one from. That's the name. Mr. Ulmann, what types of performance gains do analog computers really blow digital computers out of the water? What speed of computation multiples are reached?
That depends on the problem. There are problems where digital computers are definitely better suited, but there are also problems where analog computers are better suited. For example, some of the reaction kinetics problems I talked earlier about, you can expect a speed up of 30. So we are a factor of 30 faster with an analog computer than with a comparable digital computer, but we are a factor of 1,000 more energy efficient. So while a digital CPU, we did benchmarks on an Intel i7, ramps up to 50 or 100 watts during the computation, the analog computer basically runs with about 100 milliwatts. So the overall product of energy efficiency and time efficiency is very in favor of analog computers for certain types of problems.
I watched, I had to laugh so hard when I watched your lecture, 2017. It's on YouTube. It's in German. I don't know if you've got how many English lectures are there, but that was beautiful. You showed a picture of the plumbing being installed for a supercomputer and everything, like all the heat that is generated by these computers and the inefficiency compared to all that energy lost in heat.
Yeah, and the energy efficiency of analog computers has several really big advantages. Apart from the ecological point of view, you can do something which you cannot do at this scale with digital computers. You can, if you have a look at some ARM processors, for example, you can stack chips on top of each other. But typically you have one CPU chip and one memory chip, and that's it, because you can't get rid of the heat produced in this setup. if you have analog computers highly integrated on chips and you have about 500 milliwatts per chip, you can stack a really big number of chips together. And so you can really get three-dimensional wiring in such a silicon cube of analog computing elements, which you basically cannot do with digital computers. So the energy efficiency directly yields a way better packaging technology in the far future. That's nothing to be explored in the next 2 years, but definitely in the next 5 years, I think. And with three-dimensional interconnects within basically a silicon cube implementing an analog computer, you can, for example, implement artificial neural networks with three-dimensional interconnects like a brain does, which you cannot do easily with a digital computer due to the high power consumption.
That's super fascinating.
I have one question, Bernd. You know, the old multipliers and function generators had an oven to
Yes.
keep the parameters stable, right?
Yeah.
The performance stable.
Horrible. Yes.
How is that solved in the modern technology?
It will be solved. We are actively working on this. Classically, you either had an oven to keep all the computing resistors and capacitors on a constant temperature. For example, the RA800 had such an oven, which was the biggest consumer of energy in the setup. The RA770, for example, does not have an oven. Telefunken developed special capacitor materials which do not exhibit a temperature coefficient that would be detrimental to your computation. But what we are actively doing and developing, our analog computer on chip will recalibrate itself pretty often. The idea is to have the computations completed in, for example, 10 or 100 microseconds. And even if you have a steep temperature gradient in 100 microseconds, the temperature basically does not change. So you calibrate your chip automatically with on-chip logic, then do your computation, and before the next computation, you will have your next calibration run, for example. Okay. So we definitely bet on auto-calibration features.
Oh, that's very clever.
I hope so.
This ties in with the next question. But what does your analog paradigm system cost? Arno Jacobs. I think that's his real name. Might have known.
Hi, Arno, by the way. We know each other as too. That depends on the complement of modules you want to have. A typical system for example, university use starts at about 5,000 to 6,000 euros for a small system consisting of 2 chassis. If you are very good at soldering SMD parts, I can also send you a set of boards, but you have to solve the parts yourself, and it's pretty horrible to build these machines. And some of the parts are, for example, an LQFP100 enclosure, so you have 0.5 millimeters of pitch. That's pretty tricky to solder. So the main driver for the cost is the amount of manual labor to build such a system. So you have to typically calculate 3 days for building a small system, and this must be, of course, be part of the price.
But it's so good to know that these are available and that you are building these. That's just amazing. I mean, I can't imagine how many work hours something like this must take. This must be extreme.
Yeah, fortunately, I never started counting. It started as a hobby project, and it got more and more professional. And in the end, we decided to make a product out of this. The funny thing is, it's just my wife and I building these machines, but we can say we are the world's biggest manufacturer of analog computers. It's really ridiculous.
That's a true. That's great. Awesome.
And some of our systems are in use in Japan, in France. It's incredible where our systems found use during the years.
Super.
And there's one, I think we're going to the last question now. I've got one question now. No, let my question first. So in the development of your analog computer on a chip, have you already planned like how you are going to raise money? Will this be like a Kickstarter thingy, or are you trying to get like a bigger company involved to put money in? What's your
Yeah.
idea here?
Kickstarter won't be sufficient. Developing integrated circuits is incredibly expensive, and developing analog integrated circuits has not too much in common with developing digital circuits. Digital chips, for example, are typically described in VHDL and then synthesized, and you get an ASIC out of this process. But an analog circuit on a chip needs a completely different design process. So we are currently actively looking for venture capital, and you need a lot of venture capital to start a project like this. The main difference to a typical startup company is that the typical software startup company needs a certain amount of money, and after 1 or 2 years has a product that will be sold. But we will need at least 2 years to have a technology demonstrator, which is usable, but not a product which you can already plug into your computer. So we have to plan on a far longer basis. So we need a different type of venture capital support for this adventure.
Well, I hope someone is listening that has venture capital. That would be
contacts in the meantime.
All the links are there, so you can find them. So I think let me just go to the last question, and that's from my buddy Anders, and that's Professor Ulmann. Do you know about the digital analog Com d'Azuar from Chilean Jose Vicente Azuar in Chile?
No, never heard about it, but I would love to learn more about it. So if you know anything about it, please get in contact with me by mail, ideally.
Awesome. Anders, get in touch with Bernd, and yeah, that would be okay. Here you go, is another one from him. I would be happy to create a link between Europe and South America to raise an important part of the history of electronic generation of sound and music in our country since the mid-50s. So
great.
Yeah. And Anders works at the university himself, so yeah, I think you guys, you should talk. He's a cool guy. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. And yeah, as I said again, this stream will be archived, so you can watch it later, go back to all the points. I think there's a lot to take in and a lot of information, and it's beautifully specialized. And I want to thank you, Bernd, for being here. I want to thank you, Hans, for agreeing to do this. I know streaming is always a different thing to like doing a lecture or something. I felt this was a lovely evening and one of the absolute highlights since I've been streaming. And my brain is just firing neurons all over from all the ideas that I've personally gotten.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for setting up the live stream. It was a real pleasure to have you two with me. Thank you very much, and let's stay in contact. And the audience feel invited to come and visit the Analog Computer Museum if you happen to be in Germany.
And we're going to be putting up the book list and the list of the records that we found, maybe, and all the information. I'll compile that, and tomorrow I will be uploading. I'll just put it in the comment and sticky that, so you can all read about all that. So I think that's it for today. Thank you all for watching. If you feel like supporting what I do here on this channel, I've got a Patreon set up. It's Patreon/Heinbach. There you can keep the show running. And that's it for this video and this stream. And I'll be seeing you in the next one. And bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
And you guys stay around. Don't hit thing. We'll just have a few minutes more. Bye-bye.
Yeah, right.